Now, as Sam mentioned there is still a large rump of Egyptian society that continues to support the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes, a lot of that support may have eroded from the more than 50% that it got at the last election, but there are still people there who are determined to continue the fight to be able to recognise the legitimacy of the Muslim Brotherhood. And as Sam also pointed out, this is an organisation that has survived persecution for decades. It is extraordinarily well organised and is an organisation that's probably the most equipped in a political sense in the country. Let's now explore just what the future may be for the Muslim Brotherhood. I want to bring in Professor Sam Makinda now, who's joining me live from Perth. Professor, thank you very much for joining us here on Newsnight. Let's just take a step back and look at what went wrong for the Muslim Brotherhood. How can you chart the decline from a year ago, winning an election, to being ousted?
Well, I would say the Muslim Brotherhood did not win the election on their own. They won the election because there were a number of Egyptians who did not want to vote for the supporters or those people who were associated with the Mubarak regime. So a number of people who voted for this government, who voted for Morsi, were not necessarily members of the Muslim Brotherhood, but there were people who wanted an alternative. But the Muslim Brotherhood itself has not held government for a long time. It's very well organized. It's a very effective campaigner. But holding power and exercising power for the benefit of the entire society is quite a different thing.
Well, and I think was it almost impossible, given the circumstances in which it took government, given the residual loyalty of some of the bureaucracy and others still had towards Mubarak, and perhaps the unreasonable expectations as well of a new young democracy?
Well, I think in a society like that, you cannot just throw away the old institutions. You have to take time to reform them and replace some of the retiring leaders of those institutions in the course of years. But you can't just move very quickly to change the institutions straight away. I think the Muslim Brotherhood made a mistake, which most parties make when they have not experienced government for a long time. So I would say it's unfortunate they have been thrown out when they were beginning to learn some of the mistakes they themselves have made. But I think that was expected.
Let's just look at how the Brotherhood was able to even get to the point of forming a government. How were they able to maintain such a level of support in Egypt during those years when it was banned, when its membership were being persecuted, some killed, some in exile, some imprisoned? How was it able to continue as a viable force?
Well, I think they were held together by their belief that God was on their side, and that if they held together, they would eventually come to exercise power in society and enable Egyptians to understand their point of view. So they were held together by their strongly held ideology. And it's that ideology that drove them. It's that ideology that enabled them to campaign very well. And it's that ideology that has actually exercised or enabled them to exercise a lot of discipline over the years.
Now, that ideology also has led to some of the disenchantment, hasn't it? That it pursued an Islamist agenda, wanting to impose Sharia law, governing for a very narrow constituency. But wouldn't all of these things have been anticipated before? Wouldn't the people of Egypt have known what they were getting when they elected the Brotherhood?
I don't think so. When people are dissatisfied with a regime that has been in power for a very long time, like, say, the Mubarak regime, which had been in office for over 30 years. And in fact, if you go back, you might have to trace the Mubarak regime to the 1950s, when the military overthrew the monarchy, and Jamal Abdel Nasser came to power in 1952-54 there. When those people established power there, they were ruling for the interests of a particular group in society. And eventually Egyptians got disillusioned with the leadership of the military. And in this case, they were looking for anybody who was opposed to Mubarak and his regime. And I would say the Muslim Brotherhood was a good candidate. And of course, even other civil society groups were afraid of Salafists and other Islamist groups, which I think which were thought to be more extreme than the Muslim Brotherhood. So they had to support the Muslim Brotherhood in order to avoid the extremist Islamist groups taking power.
Does that then open the way now in this interim period for some of those more extreme groups to be able to assert themselves?
Well, they will try, but I don't think they are likely to get very far. I would say the Egyptian people now have realized the mistake they made and would want to organize themselves differently. But also the intervention by the military has a certain ring to it, in the sense that it's not just removed President Morsi from power, it has more or less signaled that anybody who comes to power and behaves in a particular way might be removed by the military. And that's not a very good thing for democracy in Egypt. And as I would say, even if the Islamists, who are extremists, came to power, they would have to watch how the military is going to react to some of their initial steps before they go forward.
What you're outlining there is a potential in the future for any future government, even democratically elected, to be essentially a puppet of the military. Is that how you see it?
To a certain extent, that looks like it. But I would say the military did not act on its own. The military came in because there were many people, ordinary Egyptians, who were protesting and who wanted the government to go. And that is also a bad thing, because it is these people who might also make it difficult for Egypt to establish a strong foundation for democracy. Democracy requires the capacity to tolerate those who hold different points of view. But the demonstrators were arguing more or less that because the Muslim Brotherhood has made a mistake, Morsi had to go. And I would say that is not the way to build democracy. If we are going to use people like this, and I don't know whether those people were also encouraged to do so by the military, but if we are going to have civilians protesting and suggesting that even if you are democratically elected, we can throw you out if you don't give us what we want, I think that is a bad omen.
Professor, is there a viable political future now for the Muslim Brotherhood?
The Muslim Brotherhood has a long future, and I don't think that what has happened is not necessarily going to destroy it. I think they're going to find different ways of exercising power, and unfortunately, if an organization like that, which is very powerful, which is very well organized, and which is quite determined, if an organization like that is not allowed to exercise its power through democracy, then it might find different ways of asserting its power, and that could be really unfortunate for Egypt.
Are you talking about insurgency there, a campaign of violence to undermine democracy?
Yes, I'm talking about that. And you can look at Algeria in the early 1990s. The Muslim Islamist groups won the elections, but the military moved in and maneuvered around and banned them and enabled politicians to take power with the help of France and other Western governments. That did not necessarily create peace for Algeria, and I just hope that that's not going to be repeated in Egypt.
Professor Samuel Makinda, a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us there from Perth.